Take that out. I don't know what she is. Okay. It's Friday, February 23rd. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Mira Gable.
And I'm Cassiana McClenahan. In response to last week's school shooting in Florida, President Trump wants to arm teachers in the classroom. But many aren't convinced.
It's a lot to expect of teachers for them to have the role of not only doing the educational part of school, but also the security aspect of it.
There's a crisis in New York City's public housing. This winter, nearly 80% of its boilers stopped working, causing residents to feel the chill.
Thank you for calling the New York City Housing Authority. My name is Jessie. How may I help you?
Yes, I have no heat.
Today, the New York Chamber of Commerce held a breakfast for Black History Month. But some Black business owners say it's not enough.
Honestly, things like that are symbolic shows.
All this and more on Uptown Radio. First, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. A former top Trump campaign aide questioned in the special counsel's investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election is pleading guilty to 2 criminal charges. NPR's Ryan Lucas says Rick Gates' decision ramps up the pressure on his business partner, Paul Manafort. Manafort was Trump's former campaign chairman, and he faces charges.
Gates has pleaded guilty to conspiracy against the United States, as well as making a false statement to special counsel Robert Mueller's team and the FBI during a meeting with investigators early this month. The decision to plea is an about-face for Gates. He and Manafort both pleaded not guilty when they were originally charged in October as part of Mueller's probe. But Gates, who has a young family and mounting legal fees, has since changed his mind. His decision comes less than 24 hours after a grand jury unveiled 32 new charges against Gates and Manafort, including tax and bank fraud. Prosecutors say they will consider Gates' cooperation with the ongoing investigation and possibly seek leniency for him later. Manafort, meanwhile, maintains his innocence and says he will continue to fight the charges. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Washington.
The governor of Florida is presenting a plan of action to minimize the chances of another school shooting like the one that killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High in Parkland last week. Governor Rick Scott says he wants to see more money go into upgrading school security that would include metal detectors and bulletproof glass. The governor also wants to up the minimum age on buying a firearm.
We will require all individuals purchasing firearms to be 21 or older. There will be exceptions for active duty and reserve military and spouses, National Guard members, and law enforcement.
Governor Scott says he also wants a law enforcement officer at every public school throughout Florida. A sheriff's deputy with decades of experience was assigned to the school that was attacked last week, but the Broward County Sheriff's Office says Scott Peterson resigned after an internal probe found he did not go inside the building to confront the gunman. The Trump administration says it will move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in May, far sooner than anticipated. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports officials had been saying that a relocation could take years.
According to the State Department, the embassy will initially consist of just the ambassador and a small team. It will be located on a compound that currently houses consular operations. It will open in May to coincide with Israel's 70th anniversary. When President Trump announced the move last year, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, officials insisted that the move would take years because it required building and securing a new embassy. Other countries have avoided such recognition, arguing that the final status of Jerusalem should be resolved through negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians who claim East Jerusalem as their future capital. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
This is NPR News.
For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Eileen Grinch. Mayor Bill de Blasio today has announced steps he will take to improve safety at New York City schools in the wake of the Florida high school shooting last week. The mayor announced new lockdown drills and random metal detector screenings once a year, in addition to shelter-in-place drills already practiced in the city. At the Black History Gala today, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch also used the moment of her proclamation to address the young Florida high schoolers for their movement to curb gun violence.
In a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, young people are the people of the future. They are lifting their voice. I couldn't be prouder.
The event, which took place at the Museum of Natural History, celebrated Loretta Lynch as the first Black woman to lead the Justice Department. Also today, WNYC and 2 other public radio stations have acquired the news site Gothamist. They did it with the help of 2 more anonymous donors, who revived the news site after it shut down in November last year. Previous owner and billionaire business magnate Joe Ricketts came under fire when he shut the doors on the publication without notice, leaving employees scrambling. New data released this morning shows that drug-related deaths in New Jersey have reached a 6-year high. The Attorney General's office found over 2,000 deaths in the state in 2016, mostly related to opioid overdoses. This was a 40% increase from last year. The MTA has proposed a 14th Street select bus service route during the L train shutdown to appease local commuters, though some residents are not convinced.
It's going to help the commuters, but I think the whole thing is ridiculous.
According to the MTA, this would reduce commute time on 14th Street by using lanes exclusively for bus service. They also plan to add boarding areas and a temporary pedestrian space. Today at Manhattan State Supreme Court, 12 jurors were chosen in the trial of the Manhattan nanny accused of stabbing 2 children in her care in 2012. The jurors were selected Thursday afternoon for the trial, which is now scheduled to begin on March 1st. It's 39 degrees and raining in New York City. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Eileen Grinch.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Cassiana McClenahan.
And I'm Mira Gable. President Trump announced a new round of sanctions against North Korea this morning, targeted primarily at Northern Korean shipping companies. The announcement comes as the Olympics has brought a détente between North Korea and South Korea. This morning, I spoke with Lisa Collins of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The U.S. has had sanctions against North Korea for more than a decade. We talked about what is different this time.
The U.S. currently has a whole range of different sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea, but this is actually a much larger set of companies and entities that are being targeted for shipping activities. It's reflective of the direction that the administration is moving in order to impose costs on North Korea for any type of illegal activities it is doing to earn money for the nuclear weapons program development.
And are we talking about a blockade? And does it matter that this would be on the open seas?
This is not a blockade. It is naming companies who are currently doing business with North Korea. Some of them, a few of them are based out of China. Others are North Korean companies themselves. But it's basically secondary sanctioning using U.S. law to target these entities and basically put the world on notice that anybody who does business with these companies or entities will then be cut off from the global financial system.
Have sanctions ever effectively worked in the past?
I think there is a good deal of evidence to show that there are sanctions that are working. There are companies on the border between North Korea and China that have basically had to cut off their businesses because of previous sanctions. I think China has also cracked down a lot more on companies that were working with North Korea inside of China. It depends on what kind of effect you're looking at.
Are these sanctions bringing North Korea to the negotiating table?
There are some people out there who argue that North Korea is returning. But with regards to the negotiations on denuclearization and North Korea's nuclear weapons program, we just don't know that.
Finally, we're nearing the end of the Olympics in South Korea. There have been signs of unity between the two Koreas. And right now, President Trump's daughter, Ivanka, is in South Korea. So what do you make of the timing of all this?
Certainly, Ivanka Trump's presence or her visit to South Korea had given some people hope that perhaps the U.S. and North Korea might engage in direct dialogue following the Olympics. But I think this announcement, the sanctions announcement, makes pretty clear that the Trump administration it will be continuing economic pressure and that the likelihood of direct engagement between the U.S. and North Korea is fairly low right now.
Lisa Collins of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Bye.
Residents of New York City public housing have been in crisis this winter. Their heat is often off, and many have had to rely on space heaters and even ovens to keep their apartments warm. The city's housing authority, known as NYCHA, has blamed the problem on old boilers and insufficient federal funding.
But another problem recently came to light: a serious shortage of workers to maintain the boilers. Uptown Radio's Elisa Escarce has more.
Before we talk about heating technicians, let's go back to the basic problem. Many New Yorkers in public housing are cold. Judith Medina makes a call like this almost every day.
Good afternoon. Thank you for calling the New York City Housing Authority. My name is Jessie. How may I help you?
Yes, I have no heat.
Medina is sitting in her living room in a Manhattan complex called Douglas Houses. She's wearing a puffy purple coat zipped all the way up to her chin. This is her second time calling the helpline today.
Soon, ma'am. If it's still not on, you can give us a call within a few hours, okay?
Oh, I will give you a call right back.
Cold days are especially painful for Medina. She has 2 metal knee replacements.
Metal with cold doesn't mix. What you do, you get real stiff. You can't walk. You can't get off the bed.
Around 400,000 New Yorkers live in public housing. The housing authority says 80% of them had their heat go out this winter, sometimes for several days in a row. Medina is one of them. Housing officials place the blame squarely on funding. Here's NYCHA CEO Shola Olatoye at a city council hearing earlier this month.
We've been candid. I've been candid about NYCHA's financial challenges, a $3 billion loss in funding since 2001, leading to a daunting backlog in capital improvement needs.
In other words, the agency hasn't been able to replace old boilers. And it's true that a lot of the boilers are really old, like World War II old. But New York City Council member Alika Ampry-Samuel says another big problem this winter was poor management of maintenance staff. Samuel chairs the council's public housing committee, and she's been investigating the problems at NYCHA.
The most recent issue where we found out that the folks that actually work on the boilers, there was a significant decrease in those staff members.
Here's what happened. Over the last 4 years, the city lost more than a third of its heating technicians, mostly by promoting them into other departments. And the housing authority didn't make sure they had workers to replace them. So heating was really short-staffed. Officials say that right now, each technician has to maintain more than twice as many boilers as is industry standard. Kevin Norman is the director of the housing division at the Teamsters Local 237, which represents city employees. He says heating workers have been overwhelmed.
The staff will say, we do not have what we need to get this work done. How are we supposed to do it?
A couple weeks ago, Mayor de Blasio committed $200 million to upgrade or replace boilers in 20 developments. But technicians on the ground say,
it's not a matter of just throwing everything away and getting new ones.
That's a former heating technician who still works at NYCHA. He asked to be anonymous out of concern for his job. He said that often the problems that make the heat go out are small. You might need to change a filter or adjust a valve. That goes for old boilers and new ones.
New ones is great. That's fantastic. That's good. Now, we would still need the adequate amount of people staffed there to keep up with all the maintenance that's required for that new boiler regardless.
For now, the housing authority is contracting with private maintenance companies to beef up staff. And officials say they're working on training new technicians. Councilwoman Samuel says she'll be watching the city's hiring practices to make sure this type of shortage doesn't happen again. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Elisa Escarce.
Asylum and deportation hearings can be scary for immigrant families, so special volunteers have been working to help those in proceedings in New York's immigration courts. They're activists from the nonprofit New Sanctuary Coalition. But does their presence at court actually tip the scales? Eileen Grinch reports.
Before entering the courtroom, the Accompany Project's leader, Christopher James, briefs his volunteers. The situation is tricky, and they don't want to fluster the judge because they know he could send them out at any moment.
Say nothing, do nothing, follow the leader's lead. We're just here in support. We're bodies so that the judges and all the people in the courtroom see this person's not alone.
All 15 volunteers squeeze into the benches at a small immigration courtroom on Varick Street. The man they're waiting for soon marches into the room wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He waves at his wife, Juana, and their 3 children sitting amongst the volunteers. 9 months ago, Juana was desperate. ICE had showed up at her door, her husband and children in tow. It was the first time she saw her husband in handcuffs.
They took him when he was taking my kids to school, and that's nerve-wracking. Frustrating because my kids were screaming and I was too. We were all going crazy. We couldn't figure out what to do. The kids were asking, "What's happening with Dad? What's happening to Dad?" And, "Mommy, what's going on?" And I didn't know.
Juana and some family friends hired a lawyer to help her husband's case.
She never knew how to answer any questions from the judge. She wasn't paying attention, she was up in the air, and didn't know what they were talking about.
Juana spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, but felt like she was getting nowhere. She was demoralized, and the chances of her husband avoiding deportation were slim.
We were desperate.
No one should have to go through this kind of experience on his own.
That's Barbara Schmutzler, one of the volunteers who accompany people like Juana through the deportation hearing process. Close to 30,000 people have already been deported during the 2018 fiscal year. That's almost 3/4 of people who go through immigration courts.
The fact that there is an immediate effect or a difference to a human being that is, I would say measurable or palpable is important to me.
But does it really make a difference for the immigrant's case? Jason Dubzo, Washington, D.C. immigration lawyer and author of the blog Asylumist, says that he's not sure it would help on the legal end of things.
So I find that it doesn't make a lot of impression on the judges. Like if you have a case that's a weak case and a bunch of people show up to the courtroom, it's just hard for me to believe that's going to make a lot of difference in the outcome.
Juana heads across the street with her children to the courthouse. The volunteers sit on the floor in the hallway playing with Juana's children as she nervously waits for the judge to call her husband's name. Her lawyer couldn't show. She had the flu. So the volunteers' support made all the difference to Juana.
They made me feel like we, my family, are truly important. They filled a very important void in my life, and I'd say to them, I ask God that they never leave.
It's not clear whether this will tip the scales on deportation, but at least for Juana, who once felt lost in the immigration system, now feels like she has a fighting chance. Eileen Grinch, Columbia Radio News.
A week after 17 people were killed at a high school in Parkland, Florida, President Trump voiced his support for an idea that he says would prevent such massacres: arming well-trained teachers. Alan Rostron is a law professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He says that the impact of giving guns to teachers isn't clear.
Really, nobody knows for sure what the effect would be. Obviously, guns can be used to do good things or they can be used to do bad things. You can easily imagine a scenario where the fact that a teacher has a gun is beneficial and they stop a bad person or bad things from happening, but you can imagine other scenarios where the gun winds up being involved in an accident or somebody else gets a hold of the gun or the teacher misuses it, and nobody really knows which sort of occurrence would be more common.
So what about the sheriff's deputy who was at the school but didn't intervene when the shooting began? So there was someone on campus who was armed, but that didn't stop the attack. Do you think it's a good idea to have armed guards on campus? And, should the focus be on better preparing guards versus, arming teachers?
I think it's a lot to expect of teachers for them to have the role of not only doing the educational part of school, but also the security aspect of it. Even if there was some degree of safety enhancement by having teachers carry guns, I think there are people who would still be opposed to it because they just don't like the idea of teachers being forced into that role, and just the idea that that's the best we can do, that we all have to we can't prevent or minimize the risks of these things. We all just have to sort of arm ourselves.
So have people talked about, arming various officers, either teachers or guards, in the wake of, previous shootings? Have these proposals been made before?
There are some places in the country where there are teachers or administrators who have firearms on school grounds. It's still not a particularly widespread practice, though, even though it got a lot of discussion. There was certainly a lot of legislation introduced in many states, and some of it passed, and it was but maybe in a half a dozen states they sort of passed something that could allow a teacher to carry a gun. Well, I know in Kansas they passed a law that would let teachers carry guns, but then the insurance carrier that provides coverage for all the school districts said we consider it an increased risk for the teacher to have a gun, and so we don't want to cover it under our insurance, so it never really got implemented.
It's had a lot of discussion, but it's not clear, is it even a viable solution or a practical solution?
You have the practical argument about what would make things safer, and then you have how people really feel about it. And a lot of people just do not like the idea that we're all just going to that our reaction to gun violence is to arm ourselves even more. It'd be like if someone said, oh, we have a lot of school shootings, we have to do something about it. Every child's going to be issued a bulletproof vest and a helmet that's bulletproof, and we'll have them wear that all the time. And that might actually enhance safety, but a lot of people would be terribly dismayed by the idea that that's what we have to do in our society.
Professor Rostron, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
It's the middle of Lent, a time when Christians around the world give up something important to them. This year, St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown Manhattan is giving up its air rights.
In New York City commercial real estate, the rights to the air above buildings can be worth millions. Yesterday, the Archdiocese of New York announced it's putting up 1 million square feet of air rights right above the church on the market. Madeline Thompson reports.
Welcome to St. Patrick's Cathedral.
It's 7 a.m. at the 139-year-old St. Patrick's Cathedral on 5th Avenue at 51st Street. Before heading to the office, worshipers stop in for Lenten Mass in the beautiful neo-Gothic building. The famous landmark draws upwards of 5 million visitors each year. This morning, Minnesotan Julie Holland was one of them.
There are so many beautiful churches around here, and I think they're just lovely. I think they add a lot to the cityscape.
Soon, this tranquil oasis could be the center of a massive bidding war, not on the church itself, but on what's above it, that is, air. The rezoning allows landmarks like St. Patrick's to sell unused air rights to developers hoping to build higher. On Thursday, the Archdiocese of New York announced it was going to do just that. You could almost say the church is giving up its air rights for Lent.
That's a pretty good line.
Communications Director Joe Zwillig says the sale will help pay for the cathedral's upkeep.
We literally had, pieces of the facade coming down and threatening people walking on the sidewalk.
Because of strict density regulations, no new buildings have been built in this part of Midtown since 2001. The rezoning aims to change that. Rob Burns is the president of the East Midtown Partnership. He says air rights transfers and an updated building stock in the area will be good for business. Burns worked on the rezoning and says developers will have to contribute to the neighborhood by creating public spaces and upgrading nearby transportation hubs.
By adding new buildings into the mix, we are going to strengthen the core and keep this as the commercial hub for the city.
But St. Patrick's is the second organization to take advantage of the new law. On Wednesday, JP Morgan announced it would knock down its existing 52-story office tower and construct a 70-story one in its place. As it turns out, the existing building at 270 Park Avenue has a history too.
It represents the modernist buildings of that era, a very significant architectural movement.
That's Andrea Goldwyn from the New York Landmarks Conservancy. 270 Park Avenue is one of several buildings the Conservancy wanted landmarked as part of the rezoning, but it didn't make the cut.
This particular building has a distinct rhythm to its fenestration, to its facade, and it's just a really good example of the buildings of this time.
But it could be gone as soon as 2019, when construction is expected to start on the new tower. The city identified around 15 other buildings likely to take advantage of the rezoning, although none have plans yet. Madeline Thompson, Columbia Radio News.
Apple is working on a new product to take a bite of the $3 trillion American healthcare market. The next version of the iPhone's operating software promises to let you keep track of your medical records on your phone.
While some see this as an important step towards giving patients control of their medical data, privacy experts are concerned. My co-host, Cassiana McClenahan, has more.
27-year-old Malia Tariq didn't think much about keeping track of her health records. That is, until she went to enroll at Columbia University last year.
I had to try to find my immunization records, and first I tried to contact my primary care physician, and she couldn't find them. Then I had to go and contact my pediatrician to see what she had, and they also couldn't find it because they have all paper records.
Tariq eventually tracked things down through a previous employer, but she was frustrated by the process.
Yeah, it was like jumping through lots of hoops to get my own personal health information, which I thought was really ridiculous.
Like many patients, Tariq left it to her doctors to track her medical records, rather than keeping copies herself. This can be a problem not just for school enrollment, but more importantly, because medical history helps doctors make informed decisions about patient care. That's according to Anne-Marie Mickelwain, a patient advocate.
Medical error is the third leading cause of death. Number 1 is heart disease, number 2 is cancer, third is medical error. There are numerous things that contribute to medical error, but one of them is that we don't have at our fingertips the complete information about our medical history, particularly our current history.
And that's what Apple is hoping to change. The next version of the iPhone software will let consumers store their medical records on their phone, keeping track of things like immunizations, lab results, and medications. Today, these records are often scattered.
Most people are seen by different doctors at different hospitals, so they're not generally in one place. It's kind of, a hopscotch.
Hospitals have been trying to make things easier, starting by implementing standardized electronic records themselves.
It's been a 7-year journey at NYU Langone to get a single record for all patients.
That's Dr. Paul Testa. He's the Chief Medical Information Officer at NYU Langone. NYU has made a big investment in its medical records system, part of a nationwide push spurred by billions of dollars of federal government investment. In return, the government has required medical providers to demonstrate meaningful use of these electronic records, with standardized interfaces to exchange data between systems in place by next year. These initiatives have laid the groundwork for Apple's new health records feature.
The goal is to let patients compile their information in a single location, so they take ownership of their own records.
The revised health app will allow patients to directly connect with the online portals that healthcare providers like NYU have already made available. The app will then encrypt and store these records. It will also regularly check back with provider portals, keeping your information up to date with any new tests or results added automatically. But not everyone is as keen on patient control of their health records as Testa. Lee Tien is a senior staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
There's a common myth that medical data is protected by the law, regardless of where it's going or where it came from, and that is not true.
HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, regulates how patient medical data needs to be handled by regulated entities like doctors and insurers, but not once medical records have moved outside of those systems.
Most people think, oh, I don't want my employer to know that. I want to be able to choose who I tell those things.
Imagine you're HIV positive or taking antidepressants. It's not hard to envision how employers or insurers might discriminate against you with that information. Tien thinks people need to be careful with their data.
I don't like to advise people to be paranoid, but on the other hand, if you only think good things about where the data might go, the odds of your being disappointed are extremely high.
Apple didn't comment for this story, but in its announcement says it has taken steps to safeguard patient privacy. Health records are stored directly on a user's device, not in the cloud, though users can share their data with Apple for product improvements. The feature is currently in beta and planned to be available in Apple's spring release. Cassiana McClenahan, Columbia Radio News. You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Mira Gable.
And I'm Cassiana McClenahan.
Coming up, we'll hear how one West African is using comedy to bring his community together.
And we'll take a look at what the homelessness crisis is costing the city.
These stories and more, but first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Bo Hamby. A former top advisor to Trump's presidential campaign pleaded guilty to charges of federal conspiracy and false statements today. Rick Gates formerly served as Trump's deputy campaign chairman. The plea is a strong indication that Gates is planning to cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Meanwhile, at the Conservative Political Action Conference, President Donald Trump weighed in on the gun control debate, defending the Second Amendment while also calling for more armed security in schools. Trump said armed teachers will only make schools safer.
When we declare our schools to be gun-free zones, it just puts our students in far more danger.
In his speech, the president also reaffirmed his border wall promise and called for changes to the legal immigration and visa lottery systems. The governor of Florida has released a plan to make schools safer a week after 17 people were killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. Governor Rick Scott outlined the plan at a press conference earlier today.
Today, I'm calling for a mandatory law enforcement officer in every public school. The final part of my action plan includes $50 million in additional funding for mental health initiatives.
The plan also proposes raising the minimum age of purchasing a gun to 21 and a $450 million initiative for student safety, which would include mandatory active shooter training. Last year, the Trump administration said it would move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, sparking controversy in both countries. Today, the State Department announced the embassy would be moved to Jerusalem this May, a year earlier than a plan offered by Vice President Mike Pence when visiting Israel last month. And the United Nations Security Council is expected to vote today on a resolution that would impose a 30-day ceasefire in Syria, although the vote has been delayed multiple times already. This is the second time they've tried to pass the resolution, which failed on Thursday when Russia refused to support it. The action comes after a week of bombings in a suburb of Damascus, including a rocket attack yesterday that killed 42 people, raising the death toll to more than 300. If passed, the resolution would allow the delivery of humanitarian aid as well as medical evacuations. And looking at weather and traffic, it's currently 39 degrees and raining in Central Park. Rain is expected tomorrow as well, but it should be a bit warmer with highs around 58 degrees. In traffic news, the southbound 2 and 3 trains are running with delays because of signal problems at Penn Station, and both the Henry Hudson Parkway and FDR Drive are backed up. For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Bo Hamby.
New York City is the only city in the country where homeless men, women, and children are guaranteed a right to shelter every night.
Sarah Stefanski is the author of a New York City Independent Budget Office report about rising homeless shelter expenses. She says that because of the right to shelter mandate, as the city's homeless population grows, shelter costs are rising, and fast.
So we've seen quite a rapid growth in the cost of funding our homeless shelters here in the city. The shelter cost in 2018 is now about $1.8 billion as an annual budget.
And the city's share, what is the taxpayer money going towards?
So there's a variety of different types of shelters that the city is using. Some are buildings designated to be homeless shelters. Others are apartments that the city rents out to house families temporarily. And there's also been the use of hotel rooms. So the city will rent out hotel rooms to temporarily house families.
And the report that you're working on highlights a growing disparity between these federal and city funds toward fighting homelessness. Are there any other cities that are spending this much on homelessness?
So New York is unique in this right to shelter. And so our sheltered homeless population is significantly larger than many comparable cities.
And are we spending more per person, or is the city taking on more of the burden from the federal government?
The federal assistance that is used to help pay for homeless shelters, while the real number has increased, the share has not kept pace with these rising costs. As these costs have increased, the city has had to bear a much larger share of the homeless shelter expenses.
That was Sarah Stefanski of the Independent Budget Office. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
When immigrants move to the United States, they leave a lot behind. Friends, family, the comfort of home. Dan Rabb looks at a comedian from West Africa who gave up a lot more and ended up giving back.
When seamless delivery man Adama Zongo walks past fellow immigrants from Burkina Faso, they often do a double take. It's not every day they see a celebrity on the streets of Harlem, and especially not one from their home country. In Burkina Faso, Zongo is one of the country's best-known comedians, a staple of TV and film. He toured West Africa, performing to sold-out crowds like this one in 2013. While Zongo's career on stage brought him fame, it did not bring him wealth. So 3 years ago, he sold everything he owned and came to New York.
Quand je suis arrivé, les gens étaient
I ran into many people, and they would say, "You came for a show or something? Congratulations on all you're doing. We follow your shows here." At the time, they didn't know I'd come to stay.
Zongo spoke little English, so his job prospects were limited. And just like that, the movie star became a dishwasher. Zongo admits he felt some embarrassment at the loss of his social status. But with his comedian sense of the absurd, he decided to embrace his new identity. A few days into his new job, he offered some career advice on Facebook for the folks back home.
If you have a wife, you can start by washing her dishes. If you don't have a wife, start by washing your mother's dishes. Because once you arrive here, you're washing dishes. When I posted it, it had many shares, more than 800.
That's a lot of shares in the world of Burkinabe movie stars. He had broken an unwritten rule of West African immigrant social media. Admitting that life in the U.S. is hard. Bukari Sawadogo was one of the hundreds who saw Zongo's post and was thrilled. He's also from Burkina Faso and a film professor at City College. He says isolation in his immigrant community is a big problem. With newcomers reluctant to acknowledge their struggles on Facebook and little time to socialize in between multiple jobs, people are lonely, and he had an idea to create a show that reflected Zongo's real experience.
We thought, how about creating stories that are based here, their own stories? It reflects back on the community.
So Sawadogo and Zongo created The Adventures of Legend in New York, a web-based comedy series. Each episode follows two characters, a dishwasher and a delivery man, as they navigate the challenges of life in New York. The show was an immediate hit.
Just putting it online, just within 24 hours, we find ourselves with 20, 30,000 views. So the hunger for these stories is out there.
What shocked the filmmakers was how well the show caught on in West Africa itself. But this shouldn't be surprising, according to Vicky Katz. She's a sociologist and the co-author of Understanding Ethnic Media, Consumers, Producers, and Societies.
The ability for ethnic media to target not just the immigrants who've left a country, but people who have remained in the country is something that we see increasingly.
Kat says the internet has made it possible for immigrants to separate myth from reality for friends and family overseas.
That's something you couldn't do in an age of newspapers or radio, where it was not possible to transmit these things in the same way.
Sawadogo says he hopes that seeing the realities of life in the diaspora helps young Africans make more informed decisions about whether coming to the U.S. is a good idea.
If young people can see the reality of what is going on here, maybe, it will be, a reality check.
Zongo and Sawadogo hope to start production on Season 2 of The Adventures of Lagond next month. Dan Rabb, Columbia Radio News.
And now, welcome to Your Neighborhood, featuring the voices that make New York City come alive.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, contestant number 2, the one and only Miss Shelby Lane.
So tonight's number started, it was a Broadway theme, so I chose to do Gypsy, and I started off with a little sound bit of Gotta Get It gimmick, and I sort of got into doing drag by being a balloon artist, and so I made making balloons my gimmick, and so it went from Gotta Get a Gimmick to Let Me Entertain You, and during Let Me Entertain You, I did a balloon hat, and I did about 3 costume reveals. My drag name is Shelby Late. And the name came about because if I was born a female, my name was going to be Shelby. It feels like an extension of myself. I don't feel like it's myself. I don't feel like Ian is on stage being judged or evaluated. Drag makes me feel valued and important.
Oh my God. All right, that's Shelby Lane, ladies and gentlemen. Come back, come back.
That was Your Neighborhood from Columbia Radio News.
That's it for this edition of Uptown Radio.
We were led today by executive producer Juliet Jibkiro. Senior producer Wendy Rhodes managed our reporting staff.
Director Stevie Hertz coordinated our studio production with Sarah Wyman and Jennifer Siegel.
Dan Rabb got the stream live to the web. Elisa Escarce helped with production. Editor Colin Marston led our copy team.
Radio professionals Deb Amos, Gilda DeCarli, Sally Herships, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff, with support from Carrie Donahue. I'm Cassiana McClenahan.
And I'm Mira Gable. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thank you so much for listening.